Good afternoon. On the air of the big game, Vladimir Putin will already hold several bilateral meetings today with the leaders of African countries who are already flying to St. Petersburg for the second Russia-Africa summit, which will be held in St. President of Egypt, Prime Minister of Ethiopia and the head of the New Development Bank BRICS as a whole, as Yuri Ushakov, aide to the President of Russia, said the day before, 49 out of 54 African countries confirmed participation in this summit. And more than half of them will be represented at the level of first and second persons, with Vladimir Putin plans to meet with each of the leaders who came to the summit. The apogee themselves, of course, will be the plenary meeting too, be held on Friday, at which Vladimir Putin will speak and, according to Yuri Ushakov, 17 heads of African states will be closely following and commenting, and this summit will certainly become very an important contribution towards Russia, with a world majority of which Africa is an increasingly significant part.
И полюсами которого, собственно, являются Россия и Африка. Ну и также этот саммит является очень наглядной демонстрацией полного провала попыток Соединенных Штатов.
Our country in the international arena and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu today continues his visit to North Korea, where the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War of 19,503 is being celebrated, and where the further expansion of Russian-North Korean cooperation, including the military sphere, has already been discussed today. Sergei Shoigu held talks with his North Korean colleague and noted that the DPRK is an important partner, and this, of course, seems to me a very unambiguous signal from South Korea that the position of a satellite of the United States and participation in anti-American politics has its price. The price is quite high. Now let's talk about what is happening on the front where the future world order is determined. This is, of course, the Ukrainian front, and in particular, we will talk about what is happening in the Avdiivka direction with RIA Novosti war correspondent Andrei Kazakov. He is in direct contact with us. Andrei Olegovich, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, studio. If we talk about the front, then the situation is now the following. In the Avdiivka direction, mainly opposition battles continue. Heavy clashes are taking place in a small one, while the Russian army carried out several offensive operations to the north and south of Avdiivka itself. Now, on the outskirts of Donetsk, there are hot artillery duels, as always, the enemy is hitting the peaceful quarters of the city last weekend. More than 250 NATO-style cannon artillery shells of 155mm caliber arrived in the city. The Russian army, in response, strikes artillery with multiple launch rocket systems. Regime hits military targets and not civilian targets widely and very successfully. It should be separately noted that various unmanned vehicles are being used. Lancets, they are becoming more and more used very successfully and very actively. FPV drones of the Gadfly system are also used with their help. The accumulation of personnel at the Kiev regime elements of fortified areas, dugouts are destroyed, observation posts, SBK warehouses. NATO equipment, by the way, a significant amount of it has already been burned in an effective direction, including American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and M113 armored transporters in general. The enemy has not achieved any significant success anywhere, failed to seize the initiative, but at the same time continues to pressure along the front. Our troops reflect all the attempts of the Kiev regime in its conduct of the so-called counter-offensive and systematically grind up all the assault units thrown by the North Atlantic Alliance and the breakthrough. Thank you very much, Andrei Olegovich. Take care of yourself and keep us informed. Now let's talk about how the situation on the fronts is developing. In general here, in particular, the Russian Ministry of Defense and the EU announced successful actions in the Krasny-Limansky direction, where Russia, defending itself in the south, is developing an offensive action and, in particular, announced the liberation of the settlement of Sergeyevka. This is just in the Limansky direction. Let's Ask about this and not only about this Boris Alexandrovich Rosenauer. Traditional military observer Boris Alexandrovich, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It can be noted that today in the morning the enemy switched to the massive use of armored vehicles. Direction at work. This is one of the most powerful attacks in recent weeks. Dozens of units of BMP armored personnel carriers were thrown. But this attack was almost 2 hours the day the enemy was repelled, according to various estimates, from 25 to 40 units of various equipment, including Leopard tanks, American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and a large number of other armored vehicles. He did not achieve a serious result. The total cost for today is not significant. Well, neither the five houses have any significant achievements, nor the enemy's work for the time being Rimskaya. To speak where the enemy's surges continue on the old Nevskoye, here the battles are going on near the village where the enemy is suffering losses. It's also worth noting that over the past a fairly significant number of prisoners surrendered here, both on the Bremen Ledge and on the positions of the 58th Army in the Zaporizhzhia direction as a whole. Small activities in the Krasnogorovka area in our favor, as a whole. There's no change in the Artyomovsky direction. The enemy continues fierce attacks on Kodamovka and Tix. Here fighting is going on near the village of a combat. Source: the sacred nature of the enemy seeks to break into the Tix at any cost. And own that is, this is an operational level task. In fact, they are abandoning all the reserves that they had not previously accumulated in the region of an hour in Yar, but we, as it were, are also using the reserves in the sphere. Therefore, today the keys are under our control, and in the north of Artyomovsky, our troops have almost repulsed all the serious redemptive attempts of the enemy. He is here to occupy, but new positions failed and the attacks clearly ran out of steam on the Sevsky Ledge. The situation in the whole world did not endure. They did not endure in the Svatov direction. Our troops continue to firmly hold the initiative, conducting offensive operations in the Novozlavka, Karmazinovka area and in the direction of Makivka and Nevsky here in recent days. Here we have occupied somewhere then about 30 to 35 kilometers of territory, have liberated Sergeyevka. The enemy also reports that they have already left the villages of Nadezhda and New Borovka. So this should also be confirmed in the coming days. In theory, here we have kebab for advancement, and that the main thing is that this offensive breaks the enemy's plans for the whole world. As a direction, our troops also advance in the area of the Bruise, and the two-river enemy here is in a tough defense. We should expect us by the evening the results of missile attacks on Ukraine. That is, they say the rocket is already used, so by the evening we will find out where it flew in. Thank you very much. Boris Alexandrovich, keep us posted. Well, we are waiting for an even more detailed review of the situation on the fronts from you this afternoon, so I do not say goodbye to you. Well, the United States does not lose hope, despite the fact that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has obviously failed. The United States still hopes to turn the situation for the better, for naturally, yes, and in this regard, they are firstly pumping up Ukraine with weapons of military equipment. Just the day before, the Pentagon has already officially announced a new military aid package for $400 million. There and missiles for Petri, Hydra missiles, and so on, 32 Striker armored personnel carriers, and secondly, the West is conducting collective and coordinating pressure on Ukraine so that it nevertheless throws its main forces into battle, which is still kept in reserve after the catastrophic losses that the Kiev regime suffered in the first weeks of this counteroffensive. Just recently we were talking about unambiguous signals from the United States that, in their opinion, the Ukrainians are fighting wrong, and therefore the counteroffensive stalled. Today the same signal was already sent by Berlin. The publication published a secret report of the Bundeswehr that came into their possession, so to speak well. Of course it was a targeted leak in order to send a signal to Ukraine, and in this secret Document criticized Ukrainian tactics. It says that this is a tactic of small groups.
На линии фронта, и вообще немцы пишут, что украинские командиры мешают своим солдатам применять
to use in battle those skills that the West taught them, and soldiers with combat experience who have passed, so to speak, who spent some time on the battlefield, generally master Western battle tactics worse in general. They don't want to use it in general. They didn't teach horse food. They didn't want to do what they were taught well. In fact, it's trouble that the conclusion is that in this way they completely miss the opportunity that the West gave them by providing their technique and teaching Western combat techniques. Ivan Pavlovich, what do you think about this? They have a clear contradiction here, since the sphere and the Pentagon are well aware, and this is obvious to any person, even the slightest acquaintance of an acquaintance with questions of tactics are, in the current situation, a large-scale frontal offensive is doomed to defeat and will lead to even greater losses in the first place. Already it was from this that it just started. They were unable to cope with situation, having in hand all those cards that the Pentagon and NATO issued, respectively. They issued a lot of armored vehicles, as they consider trained soldiers according to the NATO methodology, but there was no aviation, for example. That this is not so now. So this paper appears. Firstly, it is written by people who are not familiar with the war. As such, for many, many years, that did not show a German officer who knows what it is. The participation of German contingents was even in Somalia. They tried to send a humanitarian military contingent there. There was something in Afghanistan. They don't know what they're talking about in the current situation. The Ukrainian army is doing the only thing possible that it can do, because it pushes its back, come on, in small groups too. Wedge in to try to expand the bridgehead. This does not work. Firstly, we already developed counter-tactics on this issue a long time ago, and in general it has always been the basis for what the Russian army has always been famous for fighting in defense. It was useless, impossible to take if it would not be natural to apply betrayal. Some of the childish tricks against the current, very well built Russian defense. Therefore, the Germans have the only way out to blame everything on the Ukrainians and make claims against the Americans. They say, decide on the planes. You might think that these tanks somehow solve the situation on the battlefield. No way. They're burning in front of our positions, and they're almost burning out there. In principle, they are gone. The Kiev regime has the impression that it is not only the Pentagon generals who are so cruel and bad, but this is the general opinion of NATO and is connected. It seems to me that you were the first to note this with two fundamental factors. They relieve themselves of political responsibility because their own elites ask generals like Lloyd Austin, yes, why is it happening what is happening, they say there, and here we taught differently. It's then they're bad, they're stupid, they don't understand anything, so we wanted like this. They don't follow our advice, thereby removing political responsibility from themselves. And the second thing is just they throw it to slaughter, yes, because both A and the signals of the Pentagon and in this secret document of the Buddha, the sphere, actually says that Ukraine should go on a frontal attack, respectively, suffer catastrophic losses on which the West does not care. The West needs some results on earth, and how much the Ukrainians will die in the process. They absolutely do not care. Now a small advertisement, then we will continue. Music on. The air a big game in the West. They continue to discuss what to do with the current situation when Ukraine cannot achieve victory on the battlefield in the United States. The presidential elections are on the nose, and the economy is also not very good. Everything is fine, and the traditional establishment believes that even despite the actual defeat on the battlefield, despite the fact that there is no victory, you still need to continue on the same course because the recognition of defeat from the point of view of the traditional elite is much harder than the costs that the West incurs simply from continuing from current situation, and this point of view of the traditional establishment does not seem to be accurately expressed by that. Professor Emeritus of King's College London, Lawrence Friedman. Listen. One of the paradoxes of war is that even when the original goals become unattainable or discarded, the need not to look like a loser only increases, and so much that even if victory is no longer possible, the government will still persist to show that they have been defeated. It is obvious that in this war Ukraine will win or lose, and not NATO, but having become so devoted to the Ukrainian cause, the alliance cannot retreat, especially when so much money has been invested in equipping the country for its struggle and victory, finding resources to support Ukraine can be a daunting task, but it is truly a collective effort, and most of the US allies have made significant financial and material contributions. Also, a Russian victory would be a geopolitical disaster for NATO, as the risk of all-out war between the alliance and Russia would be much higher. But Alexander Viktorovich, do you agree that from the point of view of the Biden administration, maintaining the current status of maintaining the current one is simply a continuation of the war, even a little bit of any chance to win is perceived by them as a lesser evil compared to some kind of settlement? Of course, war to the last Ukrainian today is the main Biden tactic, and his administration, they put pressure on their allies in the North Atlantic Alliance. There are various models of economic interaction, opening new enterprises in the long term, in order to saturate certain territories with weapons and earn quite serious capital on this, including Biden, which the family is ready to love kickbacks, so much lobbying for military stories, and, accordingly, in Ukraine they should already understand soldiers are ordinary soldiers who today are essentially not controlled by their commander-in-chief, not by this notorious narrowed one and others. They are simply pushing Ukraine into a ravine today, and the death of these soldiers is completely on the conscience of the American establishment and Biden administration. Therefore, Ukrainians, you have to think about where they're going. They seem to me to risk repeating the fate of Afghanistan to a large extent because the United States really officially came to the conclusion that it was impossible to win in Afghanistan in late 2008 and early 2009. In fact, the Obama administration came up with this, but not the Obama administration nor the Trump administration. They took responsibility for the defeat. They really kicked a tin can in front of them, as the Americans like to say, postponing tens of thousands of Afghans died for later. But the Americans didn't care because they didn't want to take responsibility, and Biden, it seems to me, took responsibility for leaving Afghanistan, not because it was necessary later, not because it was impossible to win, but because it was necessary to switch to another priority and the emergence of another priority, namely China and Russia, as enemies that must be fought, forced him to leave Afghanistan. Therefore, in the event that the emergence of some other priority for the United States may switch their attention, and then the Kiev regime will exactly repeat the fate of the Ghani regime in Afghanistan. Well, Zelensky is actually waiting for Zelensky. It seems to me that disappointment is already today because, at his call, the recently created Ukraine-NATO Council is meeting at the level of permanent representatives and will discuss the fate of the transit of Ukrainian grain across the Black Sea. It is obvious that no decisions will be made following the meeting of this council.
И уже Европейский Союз, естественно, включился в обсуждение вопроса, и вот накануне комиссар по вопросам сельского хозяйства Евросоюза, что примечательно поляк,
Janusz Wolski said that the European Union is ready to export all Ukraine's grain directly, that's all, and moreover, to compensate for transport costs, because transporting by land is naturally more expensive than by sea. Lithuania has already stated that the Baltic countries are ready to fully include their ports in the export of Ukrainian grain, and this is one from the scenarios. But here the Problem is that Ukraine and Lithuania do not have a common border, either through Poland or through Belarus.
А Польша сама настаивает на том, чтобы продлить запрет, который был введен еще весной на ввоз украинского зерна на...
Territory after September 15th, and by the way, the day before, the Council of the European Union officially confirmed here 5 EU countries that have borders with Ukraine. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, well, Bulgaria also joined this, demanding an extension of this ban. And there is also a problem in price because in Poland, the railway gauge is already in post-Soviet Ukraine. Post-Soviet Lithuania, yes, we have it a little wider, and therefore if Ukrainian grain is transported through Poland, then it turns out that the trolleys must be changed twice. And the price increases accordingly. Ukrainian grain simply becomes uncompetitive compared to Russian grain. What do you think? Well, as for Lithuania, I think that this is just such a political mockery of Kiev, because Lithuanian ports follow such an arc. No one will be lucky if it is expensive and long to transport to the Romanian and Bulgarian ports firstly. Everything is not so simple with grain from Ukraine, and this is precisely the ban that you told Dmitry that indicates this. Yes, what does it mean to prevent this grain from getting into Poland, Romania, Hungary? Americans have not yet come to terms with the fact that they lost in Ukraine, and since they have not come to terms with this, they are putting pressure on the land market in Ukraine. In some respects, the termination of the grain deal is beneficial to the United States, to American big business, yes, and to the European Union. Now I will list the benefits that they get in the first place. They can increase the share of land that is controlled by American business, according to the latest data that was leaked. It was somewhere, well, in the region there are 26 to 28% of the entire territory of Ukraine, raised this share to 50% in the context of high taxes on land in Ukraine in conditions when local agricultural producers are frightened. No, they will not export this grain. It's already that if they're exported through the mediation of the structure of the European Union, then the discounts will be simply colossal to get rid of the land will sell the land who will buy this land, but American holders of the future is the question of what the Americans want. The European Union introduced allowed at least restrictions on the transport of food from Ukraine to its territory after it had already entered its market. That is, it was a spring measure. That is, they introduced it not in October, not in November, not even that in September and August of 1922. They introduced it right at the very end, when food flows were already pouring into them, so they may now be interested in importing this grain anyway, and the corridor that Brussels is talking about for grain from Ukraine is not a corridor at all in the direction of Tunisia or strange equatorial Africa. This is in the direction of European pigs, of pigsties, yes. This is where the European Union will go, and here the Euro solves the following tasks. Firstly, it is to limit inflation in the food market. Secondly, to ruin European farmers. We must remember that one of the main enemies of Brussels are European farmers. They blocked the roads so many times, dumped manure somewhere right in the center of the Belgian capital, and, in principle, European farmers, from the point of view of the financial capital of the financial elite in the West, are too small, too built into market processes. They need to be ruined, and grain from Ukraine is way one of the ways to bankrupt European farmers. Well, after all, Poland is also solving the problem of war fatigue. A ban on the import of Ukrainian grain for the Polish authorities is now simply necessary for advertising purposes, simply because the Polish society does not want Poland to be drawn into conflict. Meanwhile, the Polish economy is sinking, and a very significant reduction in industry. I agree that Polish farmers are enemies of the United States, because of Polish farmers, the United States cannot in any way impose on the European Union favorable trade agreements with them. In addition, Poland demonstrates a true attitude towards Ukraine to the Ukrainian people. Yes, it is not a friend of Ukraine, but simply uses Ukraine for anti-Russian policy well, while NATO is discussing the European Union. Here Russia is acting and in fact proving that it is ready to replace Ukrainian grain on the world market. Bloomberg just the day before reported that 50,000 tons of Russian grain for moths had recently arrived at a price significantly lower than European prices, are lower by $72 per ton, which is very significant. Now, a little advertising, then we will continue. Music. On the air, a big game remains a very ambiguous situation with the training of Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 fighters, and even more so with the timing of the delivery of these fighters to the Kiev regime. Let me remind you that at the end last week, the United States significantly tightened the rhetoric about the F-16, and National Security Advisor Sullivan said that we are doing everything possible to accelerate, and that as soon as we provide it right away. And John Kirby, the representative of the NSS, generally said that they expect to transfer these fighters by the end of the year to the Kiev regime, but it turned out that in practice everything is not so simple, and the politicians' publication wrote the day before that they haven't agreed on anything yet. They didn't even agree on how to train, where to train Ukrainian pilots, who will train, will send Ukrainian pilots to the United States or American instructors. They will come to Europe, where the countries have not yet reached any agreement on anything. And again, behind the scenes, unofficially, representatives of the United States say that before the spring of next year it's not worth thinking about transferring these planes to Fambovovich. Your price is, well, really, as we used to say, opinion was divided. The situation is not easy, and miles before his departure, he leaves his post in the fall. He tried to summarize the situation once again by saying, drawing everyone's attention to the main factor that is extremely important for Americans is always how much it costs. He said, how much it costs is crazy money to maintain these planes, and this is not counting logistics, not counting fuel and lubricants, not counting pilot training. This is what is not included. This is just their content and for participation in hostilities. This and this is 20 billion, 10 aircraft. Yes, this is of course a lot of money, and therefore really stirred up this discussion, and you can see what is happening now. There are different forces that want in any case that the war continues until the last Ukrainians, and for this you need a new Wunderwaffe every time, and therefore this delivery must be made. What will happen to it? It doesn't bother anyone. They will be shot down on the first day or within a month. It does end matter. The main thing is that this happens. For example, the military, they say, well, but when we do it, and who will be responsible for this bunch of equipment? Do we say something, but we don't want it? We know that a Russian missile will arrive very soon at the Ukrainian airfield, and they will be located, and this is also clear to everyone. But very typical example now, the Spaniards said we trained 1,900 Ukrainian military personnel. No one believes how they trained the Ukrainian military personnel, who have more experience than the entire Spanish army. Something arises there. Question, are they decommissioned these money? This is 1,900, yes. Where is most of the money? And this is a well-known corruption scheme, how they carry it out, and it is clear that now they're trying to agree on how to form such a corruption scheme so that these planes go through everything they need to get there. They're not interested in fate, but the main thing is that everyone earn political or financial points, including it's just about corruption that the United States continues to deny. Scandals.
Напомню, что он недавно заключил сделку со следствием, признав себя виновным в налоговых преступлениях и по поводу незаконного хранения оружия.
They agreed on the illegal possession of weapons, but by doing so, he relieves himself of responsibility for more serious crimes related precisely to corruption, because there was irrefutable evidence that he and his father Joe Biden, when they were vice president, received bribes from the Ukrainian company Baala from her the head of Nikolai Zlochevsky, for the fact that Hunter used his dad to promote the business interests of the company, and the relevant FBI document was published. And the House of Representatives Committee is listening to the witness. His name is Devon Archer. This is a former partner of Hunter Biden himself, who was present in situations when Hunter called up his father and the singer of the President of the United States, connected with the top managers of the Borislam Company in this regard. Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, has already raised the issue of impeachment, but the American press, even the Wall Street Journal, writes that even if the impeachment does not pass, Joe Biden's chances for the year in the presidential election are still sharp are shrinking. You know the Spanish shame for that. Biden administration is experienced by the whole world, the American people, not only about the actions on the territory of Ukraine, well, about the actions of his personal family and him personally. For half a year there have been attempts to hide quite serious corruption during his tenure as vice president of the Biden. Enough actively participated in the cut of funds in Ukraine and in other shady deals related to lobbying, and as it became known from the press today, his former UNIS advisor Alexander Makala has already phoned him 4 times and is trying to interfere with something now in order to prevent this deal between the Hunter and the Department of Justice, which was essentially pushed through the administration in order to steer Hunter away from the blow from the recently published documents, because the published FBI documents are still quite a significant incentive to start further investigation, and this investigation can lead to impeachment, which is being discussed in the House of Representatives, and therefore the question of possession of weapons is still the son of a drug addict. Unfortunately, yes, who allows the use of prohibited substances in the White House for the first time in the history of the White House, and, accordingly, admitted some, well, quite small stories of violations of the law in terms of taxation. That is, in fact, they're trying to take him away from the blow and thereby restoring Biden before the election, and on the contrary, Trump is being hit. Yes, that is, everyone has shown the selectivity of the injustice of American justice, its use in the election campaign, because they're trying to pin everything on Trump, including those crimes that could be civil, make criminal charges. I have 2 Hunters, on the contrary, deduce the unfavorable economic situation in the United States, and especially in Europe. Recently, the U.S. Federal Reserve officially announced that they expect a recession already this year, and the third quarter, the fourth quarter of this year, and the first quarter of next year will be in the red, and the International Monetary Fund adjusted its forecast for Germany to minus, and the German economy is expected to contract by 0.3 minus, that is, a recession of minus 0.3% this year, primarily due to a reduction in industrial production from the same for industrialization in action. Quite right, the Western economy is coming in a position very sad, and the prospect is a worsening of the situation, and first of all, of course, in the European Union, Germany is the most important such a disaster zone. Although if we recall the situation in 2008 to 2020, the green zones of the European Union, the country was Germany, Austria, Poland, first of all, and the country which pulled, or, as it was believed, to stretch the EU economy indefinitely. It was Germany. It's over with. This Germany is dying economically. But it's not quite interesting that even we already understood this. Maybe we're even used to it in our own way, but the fact that central banks intend to raise rates further, the Fed intends to raise the rate up to almost 5.5%. The European Central Bank will also increase the backlog, lagging behind there by about 1%. They have accepted this prospect. They have no weapons against this prospect. They have run out of economic instruments in order to do something, including the Americans, that is. They're ready for the economy to go down further. The only thing they want in this situation is the collapse of world commodity prices, the value of wheat, for oil, for fertilizer, on everything, and this they want.
Этого они хотят, потому что им кажется, что случись такое, убедись весь остальной
Prices are now low, then this whole world will kneel down and come to the United States and say that we are ready to accept your new rules of the game. Please restart the world economy and grow at home. Somehow, and we will help you. This happened in the early 80s. But this will not happen again, and this is where the main strategic mistake of the United States and its allies is, because it is clear that the Bank of England is also the European Central Bank. They're repeating the movement in the Federal Reserve System and all. This is an integral system, such a systemic policy, so they will have to put up with it after a while, are preparing to put up with failures in Ukraine, with the fact that a long period of economic difficulties awaits them, and this is not a crisis. We often say that when the concept of a recession is used, that is, a reduction in GDP, it seems that we are talking simply about the fact that in some quarter they will pass from a lowered state of GDP, that is, the economy will sink a little later, everything will be fine. This is not so. This is not a crisis situation. The light at the end of the tunnel is by no means visible. This is really not a crisis. This is a new state of long-term reality, and this is the fundamental mistake of the United States. It seems to me that they do not realize how fundamentally the world has changed. Ronald Reagan could have called the number one and agreed to throw a huge amount of oil on the world markets. Now this is not happening. Now the world economy, the world majority does not dance to the tune of the United States, and it comes back to them like a boomerang, and they will weaken and weaken, and thank God that we got rid of the world minority and became part of the world majority, and now we are handing over the word to the news. See you again at 16:50. Do not miss.